Good evening, Danvers. Welcome to Topics of the Town. I'm Mark Zubarek, and I have my special guest today, Jim Morose.
Evening.
We will have a good discussion going on tonight in regard to voting. Welcome to our local news broadcast report by Danvers commentators meant for Danvers residents. We sometimes have to expand our coverage because we are not a totally independent town either in Massachusetts or the United States. However, our focus will always be on local issues. That's our prime objective. So, David, if you can throw up my favorite clip of "Our Voices Will Change the World." And I think this is so appropriate that we, as residents and reporters and commentators in the town of Danvers, need to raise our voice to make changes to the world that we live in. So, highlights of the show. I want to identify topics at the beginning because sometimes you don't hang around long enough to listen to the whole show. Our first segment will start with the update of the Selectmen's meeting, which was held this past Tuesday. And the second segment is our primary segment, Danvers Voter Integrity Today and in the Future. Then we have a third segment, if we get to it, is residents concerned regarding the Danvers School Department and specifically school committee. Or we can also pull out another version of the Beverly Airport Commission. So, the agenda and opinions are solely by the Topics of the Town news host and commentators. So, just remember that we are residents of this town and we are reporting the news that we see as happening. So the first segment is the Selectmen's meeting, and we had a meeting this week, and the subjects of the meeting were very minor compared, it was all business. But one of the things that has been initiated is a committee to let the town manager that we need this CPA tax. When will this exertion of the capture of taxes from our pockets? Selectmen announced the plan for another tax increase called the CPA, Community Preservation, and I call it a tax. The 2.5 override that was defeated by the voters in 2015 and 2016. This approach is called lobbying for more funds to spend on pet projects. Here we go again, another pick of our pockets. When will this stop? This maneuvering by committee is a method to extract another $1 million from our residents, probably more than $1 million, and not manage the budget properly. So this is a method for the town manager to spend more money. The other item that I have on here for the selectmen, and I have mentioned this before, is we need to first collect the $1 million that we are leaving on the table at the Beverly Airport. Beverly Airport real estate taxes, which are industrial and commercial basically, are not being collected because of prior agreements which have basically abated the process. So before we go into the CPA, we need to start collecting what is owed us, and Beverly Airport has not been very cooperative to the residents of Danvers. So, David, if we can pull up my favorite clip of this gentleman that is sitting in a prone position, basically. In America, they call it lobbying. Everywhere else in the world, they call it bribery and corruption. And nobody's accusing anybody of bribery and corruption, but this process for extracting additional taxes from our residents is not a good process to go through.
May I interject at this
Go
moment?
for
here?
it.
So, you know, you talk about the Beverly Airport money we're leaving on the table, and then yet we want to, you know, the selectmen want to, or the town manager, or both want to, you know, start a new tax revenue by creating this CPA. So then we ask ourselves, we already have money, like you just said, you know, just so you put it in perspective here, you know, we should be getting the $1 million plus for the last 40 years from the airport.
Right.
You know, we should have been getting that money, and that's owed to us because that's, you know, that's money on the table, like you say. That land is in Danvers and it's not being taxed, but we're being taxed. In fact, didn't our taxes just go up a couple $100?
Oh, at least $286 on my tax bill.
There you go.
So-
is that per quarter or per year?
That's per year, I
Okay.
believe.
And now
Right.
now with the tax of the CPA, that's going to be a piece onto our tax bill as well, which would be about 3% of your normal tax bill. So if you take 10% of your tax bill divided by 3, and
Well-
that would be about the increase. I'd guess around $6,000, 10% is 600. You would end at 3%. You'd have to pay a little, $185 maybe increase on your taxes.
That's right.
For the CPA.
And-
And then you're not really guaranteed. There's a whole process and procedure. It's kind of like lobbying. You have to lobby to get your project in, and will we get it? Will we be on the list? Will we be on the top of the list, middle of the list, bottom of the list? Prioritize. You know, everything is prioritized. So we
Jim,
don't know where we're
the problem is that this particular proposal has been defeated 5 years ago.
That is correct.
And we, as residents, have gone through a very extensive process to lobby against it. Because I think at that time, we were talking about a 1.5% to 2% tax increase. And our taxes this past year in December have gone up by $286 on a $6,000 bill.
That's right.
Now we're asking for another 3%. So
And
that,
still leaving the airport alone.
That's right.
We wouldn't want to bother them or hurt their feelings by asking them for their fair share.
That's
Where's
right.
this fair share? Wow.
well, there is no fair share. We are all paying through the nose. So
Okay.
that is the summary of what has transpired on the selectmen's meeting. And the one thing that I like to bring up also is finally, I have received the executive session minutes of the meeting where they beat up on our poor selectman Matthew Duggan. And that thing doesn't say anything at all, except that Mr. Trask wants to really stop any communication with our residents. Why are we elected to go and present ourselves to the residents, and why are we spending the time as selectmen if we can't go and communicate with our population?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I did watch the selectmen's meeting to see what was happening with that executive session after that article in the Salem News about that. And so I thought it was interesting that when they voted to accept the minutes of the meeting, the prior meeting, after, okay, so they had the executive session, then they had the regular meeting. So back in December, right?
Right.
And so then just 2 days ago on Tuesday, they had the, this meeting, and they voted first to accept the minutes of the last meeting, and everyone voted yes, except for Dan Bennett, Selectman Bennett, abstained. So I'm kind of wondering why he abstained, what was in those minutes. But I mean, I do know that at one point he did leave the meeting. He asked for the resignation of Matt Duggan, and Matt said, no, I'm not going to resign. And Dan said, I can't work on the board with someone like that, and he walked out of the meeting.
But
I think that was part of the minutes, but I didn't read the minutes.
It is, but
and so
But the thing is that he was at the last selectmen's meeting.
Yes, he was.
So I don't know if it was a posturing measure or what, but we need to investigate that further.
Yeah,
But we'll.
But he did accept the minutes of the executive board meeting.
Yeah.
Just
All right.
as a point.
So let's move on. We're into our segment 2. And this is residents' concerns regarding the Danvers voter integrity today and in the future. Now, we have a very brief clip that we'd like to present, and this is really based on the national feelings of what's going on with our election process. But then after that, we'll go into the details of our own town of Danvers, state of Massachusetts, because the town of Danvers is restricted by the voting acts of the state of Massachusetts. So David, if you can throw that clip out, thank you.
Old-fashioned, homegrown voter fraud. Let's look at 3 of the worst offenses. Example number 1, bloated voter rolls. In 244 counties across the United States, there are more registered voters than there are people legally eligible to vote. 29 states have counties with more registered voters than legal residents, and 8 states have more registered voters than actual voting age people. When the Supreme Court upheld Ohio's efforts to clean up its own voter rolls in 2018, the majority opinion cited Pew Center statistics. 24 million voter registrations in the United States are either invalid or significantly inaccurate, and nearly 3 million people are believed to be registered to vote in more than one state. These numbers have a shocking implication. It's very easy to exploit our voting system. During an undercover investigation, New York City detectives made 63 attempts to cast illegal ballots based on flawed voter rolls. They were successful 61 times. Similar investigations in other cities and other states produced the same dismal results. But phony voters on the rolls is just one threat to election integrity. Here's example number 2, ballot harvesting. In 2016, the state of California, one of the states with more registered voters than citizens, became the first state to legalize the practice of ballot solicitation. That is, the collection and delivery of ballots by third parties. With no trace of irony, this is called ballot harvesting. It works like this. In California, organizations with a clear political agenda are legally permitted to go to a location, say a nursing home or a church, and collect, literally harvest, ballots. The third party then transports these ballots to a polling place or an election office. This raises an obvious question. Once this third party collects the ballots, what's to stop them from changing them, or from just throwing out the ones they don't like? A guilty conscience? How do we know ballot harvesters from Democratic organizations aren't destroying Republican ballots? Or Republican harvesters aren't destroying Democratic ballots? We don't. We have no way of knowing. Let's look at one specific example. On election night in 2018, California's Central Valley Republican Congressman David Valadao held a 5,000 vote lead over his challenger, Democrat T.J. Cox. The margin was wide enough that the networks even called the race for Valadao the Republican incumbent. But wait, there were late ballots still to be delivered by the third-party vote harvesters. When those votes came in, they broke so overwhelmingly for Cox, in a historically conservative district no less, that Valadao's 5,000 vote victory became an 862 vote loss. Maybe that was just a coincidence. Or maybe not. In the first major election after ballot harvesting was allowed in California, Democrats won every single congressional seat in Orange County, which had been a Republican stronghold for decades. A year earlier, no sober person would have thought that possible. Voter corruption example number 3, voting by non-citizens. Should you have to be a citizen to vote? Silly question, right? It was once, not anymore. According to a recent poll, more than half of Democrats, 53%, support granting illegal immigrants the right to vote. Forget the legal ones. Democratic National Chair Tom Perez, before working for the Obama administration, worked for a group called Casa de Maryland, which has been a longtime advocate for expanding non-citizen voting rights. Yes, it's true that federal law prohibits non-citizens from voting in federal elections, but 11 states, all run by Democrats, currently allow non-citizen voting of some kind. Cities such as Chicago and San Francisco, for example, allow non-citizens to vote in certain citywide elections. Why? Because for progressives, demography is destiny, and many see illegal immigrants as future voters. So there you have it, 3 different ways to tamper with the vote: bloated voter rolls, ballot harvesting, voting by non-citizens. These are just 3 ways in which the left creates a clear advantage for itself on Election Day. The major media will tell you that corrupt voting practices either don't exist or are so minor they don't matter. But to believe that, you have to believe 2 things: that voter registration rolls are accurate and secure from fraudulent registrations, and that no one is trying to manipulate the results for political purposes. Those are 2 very big leaps. Maybe you want to make those leaps because you like the results they produce. But if you care about free and fair elections, no matter which party you belong to, you need to pay attention. Or pretty soon, free and fair elections will be a quaint relic of the past. No foreign government can undermine our democracy, but Americans can, and some do. I'm Eric Eggers, investigative reporter for the Government Accountability Institute for Prager University.
Thank you, David. This is an introduction to the national issues. What we would like to do is concentrate on the Massachusetts and Danvers issues. And one of the things that we wanted to do, and I want to thank Mr. Joseph Anthony for doing a lot of investigation into this matter. And he has been participating with us on providing some of the questions and inquiries of what is really happening with our voting system. So the first thing that we did, and I did, and I just want to full disclosure, I'm not registered Republican, I'm not registered Democrat, I'm unenrolled, which means that I need to vote for anybody that I want to, and that's how 70% of the town residents in Danvers are identified, registered as voters. So, one of the things that I wanted to go to is I went to our town clerk, and I think Mr. Anthony went to the town clerk as well. And I went to the Board of Registrars, which in my case was a individual that I've worked in the past, Wally Tybert. And we have in our town 3 members of the Board of Registrars, and it is Wally Tybert, a Republican, Kathy Keon, Democrat, and Catherine Ellsworth as ex officio, and Mark Lentini as the Republicans. He will expire his term in 2024. So, as we heard last Selectmen's meeting, Kathy Keown has decided not to get reappointed to this position. So we have Wally Tybert and Mark Lentini with Catherine Ellsworth. And I have worked with Kathy tremendously. She has done an excellent job. And as a matter of fact, this afternoon, I spent over an hour with Wally Tybert going over some of these questions. The primary questions and the primary responsibilities of the registrars is to conduct, well, there's a maintaining accurate list of registered voters in the town, conducting elections, accepting nomination papers, certifying initiative and referendum petitions, voter registration, processing absentee voter applications, processing address and party changes, maintaining and testing of voting equipment, preparing and publishing listing of residents, tallying election results when it's completed, hearing complaints of illegal or incorrect registration, conducting election recounts when necessary, And the board also conducts an annual census and has other duties and responsibilities as may be assigned to them under Chapter 51 of the Massachusetts General Laws. The Board of Registrars of Voters consists of three persons, as we said, for 3-year terms. So the general laws are the elections in each town and city and town are basically conducted under the Chapter 51 laws by the Secretary of State. Those are cast in stone, and what we have at this time in the town of Danvers is at this time, 3 types of voting. I have noted here that mail-in voting is one option, but that's expired as of December 15th. And we have early voting, which is by state mandate. I hate to use that term, mandate. And absentee voting, and then in-person voting, where most of the votes are cast, and the registrars and the town clerk take care of the machines and their processes. So who is involved in the process, voluntary or otherwise? Who are the players? How many? We just went through 4 registrars. Town clerk has the bulk of the responsibilities because they delegate that to them. Effective officers between parties, they're not elected officers, but they're appointed officers. The Board of Registrars is appointed by the selectmen after a period of defining which party they belong to, and they are basically presented to the Board of Selectmen by the town manager. So here's another way that the voting happens because they're appointed, they're not elected. So, Jim, in your experience, have you had any experience with the registrars at all?
Well, in the full disclosure, Mark and audience, I am the chairman of the Danvers Republican Town Committee. So yeah, I have been involved in a lot of political races. I've been a poll watcher. I've been involved in the political process. And even as much as I'm involved, I don't really know everything.
Right.
And I get confused sometimes. I mean, I talked to Kathy several times about some of these things, and I ask stupid questions because I don't understand the laws, and so things are changing all the time. And the more I think about it, like you said, we have Republicans and Democrats, but they're dwindling.
They're minorities.
They're the minorities now. It's the unenrolled. So shouldn't they have a register of voters for the unenrolled?
As a matter of fact, I asked that question of Wally Typer.
Really?
And he said that they're not enrolled as a party. The law in the state states Democrat, Republican, and I think we have some libertarians right now, and there is no independent party at this time. So the registrars are going to be one Republican, one Democrat, one Republican, and the town clerk. The town clerk does not have to be enrolled in either party, but she is the official keeper of the gates.
Right.
So
I was going to say, as part of the whole process, I mean, everyone, there's 16,000 registered voters in Danvers, I'm pretty, roughly. 17,000.
It's probably more than that right now.
Okay, so if people go to, but on any given day, even on our local elections, we're lucky if we get 8 to 10 to 15% voter, people showing up at the polls, and then this is an odd year, or 22 is a midterm they call it. So there's going to be governor down. So there's no, there's no presidential race, and so we're lucky if we get maybe 60, 70%.
Maybe,
that.
yeah.
And then in the federal elections, we might get 70 to 80, depending on the activity. But again, voting has always been a personal thing. If you're motivated to vote, you get up and you go vote. There's all these new initiatives because of COVID. I can see where people, were a little skittish about these laws, and we did let the mail-in ballot lapse en masse. But again, when I talked to Kathy about that, the state always sends out the letters to all the cities and towns as to what the process will be for this election, whether it's going to be the next municipal election, the next state election, or the next federal.
Well, we have right now, what we have is a town election coming up in May.
Correct.
Then we have a primary in September, and then we have the biannual or
general
midterm elections in November 8th, I believe, this year. So the thing is that other than the town employees, town registrars and political party officers, who else is involved in the overall election process? That was a question that's been raised. And the thing is that the machines are calibrated and checked out before each election by a consultant. So that's supposedly an independent individual under the auspices of the town clerk. And the state, in some cases, does provide funds for the election process, especially when we had the early voting. They compensated the towns for the time and effort that was done to get the early voting in. Mail-in voting right now is on hold as of December 15 because that legislation expired. And what they're talking about, and I will, this is from Wally and Kathy, is that it'll come back sooner or later, but most likely by the presidential election in 2024. But in the meantime, it's going to lapse, and we'll see what happens, but right now there's no activity on it. The state does provide some assistance, and especially when I said not absentee voting, but early voting. Absentee voting we've had forever because that is a process that's been accepted in the state of Massachusetts and in the town of Danvers. And I've used it many times because I was on the road all the time. So if you go in, you basically request the ballot, and you can vote right there and then, submit it, seal it, and submit it, and you're done. You're taken off the voting list. However, the mail-in voting, in our case right now, in the past, before this expired, was also on a request basis in this town. It was not mailed out to every voter in the state of Massachusetts because Galvin, in his wisdom, said, hey, I can't afford to mail a ballot out to everyone, and they didn't do it, but they did supply the ballot if somebody requested, which is very similar to an absentee ballot. So that's no difference. In-person voting, and I'm going to quote Wally and Kathy and myself because I have been I don't know if I would call it a voting guru that's been appearing at every election for the last 25 years. And you are allowed, there goes my phone. I guess somebody's listening. There's somebody listening out there. That's a good thing. But being involved and ready to accept what's going on with the election process, you are authorized to go and check what's going on as a interested citizen. The one thing that Wally just informed me of is that poll watchers are not the practice that Danvers has. And the state does, I believe. And the thing is that Danvers does not employ that, but they permit individuals to do their watching when they go up to vote in their own precinct. And then we know everybody in town.
Well, right. I mean, the poll watchers typically are usually, especially, either, they work with candidates, right?
Correct.
From, state reps, state senators, federal senators, governors, statewide races, what do you call them, the governor's council. So in order for them to see what's going on, they have a poll watcher, and basically what it is just to see how many people have voted. I mean, I think that the poll checkers or poll watchers can actually look at the who's been checked off, and just, if they want to see if someone they know is supposed to vote, then they call them up, so they
Right.
can look through the things real quick and just take notes and go, oh, then they call the people and say, hey, you were going to vote, you haven't voted yet. But I don't even know if that's even going to work anymore, because how did, if when the poll workers, right? The poll workers, when you come in, they check your name off. Okay, so now if you mailed in a vote or you did an absentee vote, I'm going to assume that somehow that list gets checked off.
See, they
Before, during, or after,
The-
it all depends. I
the
don't
poll
know.
workers,
How are we going to control that?
the poll workers go through a training session, but it's only before each election. And the wardens are required to be there. The poll workers do attend,
Right.
so they can learn of how to check off everybody's name and address. There is no ID required. The ID is required at registration to vote. And that's usually done at town hall or the motor vehicles, RMV. Poll watchers involved in the entire time from when ballots are received to when the election is certified. Not in that sense, but they're there for verifying, but they do not get into the bug dust of the poll workers. They don't get involved in that directly. They can watch from the distance. That's not a problem. And I'll give you an example. As you know, I ran for school committee this last town election, and I typically go in every couple of hours just to check how many votes are being cast in each precinct, talk to the residents that are coming up, and they know me. I have been requested to provide numbers every couple of hours anyway. But the thing is that this time when I was running for office, I was instructed and I was told to stay away from the poll workers of other precincts. Yeah, I went in to vote in my precinct 7.
Yeah.
And then I always go and talk to everybody.
Yeah.
And I was chided by the town clerk and said, you cannot be in here campaigning. You are supposed to be 150 feet away from the ballot box. So I took it. That's a responsibility that Catherine has, and she exercised her authority. But poll watching need to be trained at least 60 days prior to Election Day. That is more of a party responsibility, the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. As far as I was told, they are not being provided that type of training by the town clerk or the Board of Registrars. Who oversees ballot movement and storage throughout the weeks of voting all the way to election certification? There's a good one. Now, just as a word of advice, I was involved in a recount at one time when David McKenna was running for selectman. And at that time, we found, after the recount, we counted all the votes and checked them all, and all the chads were there and all that stuff. But we also found that
Right.
in the vault that the town clerk or the town hall has, there were, I think, 86 or 87 votes that were tucked away on a shelf, and they were not counted. So there was no change in the results, but there was a flaw that was happening. So right now what I'm told is that the early votes and absentee votes are hand carried by the police department from the town hall where they're being stored while they're voting in early voting, and they're delivered to the high school where the votes are then distributed to the proper precincts, and they run them through the machine so they can get an accurate count at the end.
So those boxes locked like a security bank, like a bank,
Yes.
and two locks so that no one person can
No,
open it?
no. That
No?
is not true.
Oh no, I'm just asking. I don't know. I don't
That
know.
is
I'm
not
just saying.
true. It's a safe.
I'm just asking.
It's a safe in the
Yeah.
town hall you're talking about.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, but if you're transporting the ballots, are they locked in a box?
They're in a box.
But they're not locked.
No. But they are stored
They're
in-
locked in the town hall.
in the
then
town
they need
hall.
to be transported from the town hall to the
by
precinct.
the police
Yeah, by the
department,
police
and
department.
they do it individually.
Okay. I'm just curious because of the.
So,
It's what they call the chain of custody.
Right.
You need to have, okay, it goes from point A to point B, and this person's responsible.
town clerk,
How many ballots were in there when we started? How many ballots were in there when it was delivered?
that's right, they have those counts.
Okay. And
So-
so there's a check.
There's
Parity
a,
check. as
there's
we
a
call it
check,
in the biz.
and then the wardens take those ballots and run them through the machine so they get that same count at the end. So that is one security measure, because that's been discussed over and over again, and Wally made sure that I understood that very clearly, because that is his concern as well.
Yeah.
And he appears at the elections on a periodic basis because he doesn't stay at the high school all day long, but they do go and resolve any issues that happen. Now, when those ballots are cast and the 8 o'clock comes around, everybody is cleared out of there except for the poll workers and the machines, and they run a tape on each machine,
Right.
and that box then is transported
Yeah.
for storage in the town hall, but the results are posted, and in most cases they're on the hallway of the
Yeah.
high school wall there.
Right.
And those numbers are then tabulated by
Right.
Kathy,
Yeah.
and they're issued by the end of the evening.
Well, again, and that's an extremely interesting point, because that's why I know you put me on a short leash about Danvers and versus trickle down federal and state issues, but I'm a country bumpkin. I was born in Danvers. I lived in Danvers my whole life, except for the couple years I was in the service. But I am totally familiar with the fact that every election, local, state, federal, the town, the ballots are in and they're counted by, in the old days they had to count it by hand, so sometimes it was 10 or 11 o'clock at night,
yeah.
but it was always done. It was always done before midnight, unless it was always done. And so in recent events, I just want to, just for, you know what I'm saying, I just want to, for comparison,
Right.
when I hear about all this stuff going on in the battleground states, and the ballots coming in days later, and we found 5,000 ballots under this table at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's like, what the heck is this? Okay, so I just want to say that as rural, suburban dwellers, we're not used to this craziness. That
Well,
this is trickle down stuff. So
Right.
I'm just saying, but it only seems to happen in the battleground states. And like that video said, it's funny how, like that one race that they showed, he was ahead by 5,000 and he was a Republican. And then, we found these ballots, and then all of a sudden he loses by 800 votes. It's like, statistically, that's not possible.
And
statistically, that is not possible that you would get 100% of the votes going to one side, not the other. I don't care if it's a red county or a blue, which is interesting when you look at
right.
But
that's the influence of the national.
Correct.
Different states have different rules.
Right.
And Massachusetts, sometimes you wonder, Massachusetts is so Democrat that all the elected officials in this state are Democrat. And the thing is that you worry about, how can that really happen? But it does happen. Even in this town, we have 70% are independent or unenrolled, and the Democrats win.
Right.
And the thing is that we need to keep an eye on it. Yes, absolutely correct. But let me just go on for a little bit further on poll watching this. Who oversees ballot movement and storage throughout the week of voting all the way to election certification? The town clerk and her staff at the town hall maintain that function. Now, when that is being transferred from town hall to the high school, that's done by the police department, and they take it individually and bring it over.
Right.
What allowances are made for voting machine oversight? And is it from first ballot received by mail all the way until election certification? There are only allowances is if there's a recount or a request to the Secretary of State. The town cannot go and open up those boxes and do a recount unless it's requested. And it usually has to be requested through the Secretary of State office. The ballots from the high school to the storage in the vault in the town hall is handled by the police. I asked the question, why do we have 4 or 5 policemen wasting their time over there? He says, well, that's one of the reasons they have that chain of custody from the high school to the vault.
That's right.
So that's one of the things. After that, it is basically sealed until it's certified, and that's what the town clerk and the registrars go through the numbers and make sure that it's properly accounted for.
Right.
So the other question that I have on here, and we're running right along here, voter ID. How do we know that a voter stepping up to the person voting tables are who they say they are? And after discussing this thing with both Kathy and Wally, there's customarily the town of Danvers accepts the verbal instruction of, hey, I live at 9 Glendale Drive, my name is such and such, and they check them off.
Right.
And they know most of the names.
Again, it goes back to we're a rural, local, yokel community.
Well,
I mean, we used to be. I mean, we're getting up there, but for the most part, everyone kind of knows everyone, and we all know and love our officials and elected, and people are free to go in and out and see all this stuff. What scares me is what's happening again.
Outside.
But
remember.
But it's not that far away from Danvers, because we have lawsuits in Massachusetts right now from the Dr. Shiver campaign and the Caroline Coraluso, and I think even John Paul, where they had some ballots in certain areas, and they wanted to do a check, but they violated the in certain towns. They were looking to
Custody?
get no. They were supposed to save the ballots for 90 days, and they threw them out.
Oh, no.
They did. They did. So
well, see-
so there's lawsuits going on, but because they don't get reported, then they didn't really happen and they don't exist.
Right.
Is that what happens? Is that
Yeah.
how it works in the 24 hours a day, 7 days a week?
No.
The narrative
It better not.
generation
It better
generator.
not. No, the one of the positive things about our voting system, and this is by the state basically,
Yeah.
is that we have paper ballots that are stored, and I don't know how long they're stored for. But they are certified by the town clerk and the board of registrars, and after that, it's basically a done deal.
And that's how you need to have that that handshake, or we call it the parity check, right? You want to make sure that, so when you, at the end of the day, whoever you checked in, you don't care who they are, you want to know how many ballots, how many people voted in person, how many people sent us mail-in ballots, how many people gave us absentee ballots, or whatever early ballots. All those numbers need to be added up, and then when you count the votes, it should match.
Yep.
That's all I'm saying. And so we need to make sure, and that's why the chain of custody is very important, because the other thing is, which you haven't got to, is the voting machines.
Well, we're
so-
getting to that. I'm going through this
Okay,
list because I like the way this thing is formatted, and I want to thank Mr. Anthony for doing this because he's spent an awful lot of time investigating some of the issues.
And while you're mentioning Joe, I do want to say that, again, as a full disclosure, as the chairman of the Republican Committee, I started having meetings in October, and I've had a lot of brand new flow of people coming in that are highly concerned about issues like this, Joe being one of them, and other people, not only the poll and voting issues, but these mandates for mass vaccines, and people are highly concerned. I mean, I've never
Right.
seen such activity. And so, oh, by the way, I'm having a meeting at the fire station next Wednesday night, okay? January 19th at 6:30 at the Danvers Fire Station on High Street. So come on down and see what we're talking about.
All right, now that's enough of self-advertising. Come on, full disclosure,
Yeah.
you're a Republican and I'm unenrolled. So one of the other questions here is, how do we know that voters stepping up to the person voting table are who they are? You have to understand that this supposedly is a small town, which it isn't anymore. It is a city, basically. It's larger than some of the cities that we have in our neighborhood. However, there are a lot of new voters, new residents in town that are unknown to the poll workers. So they claim that this is a honor system, basically. So there is no voter ID required at the voting booth. Does Danvers have a barcode technology that might be used to show ballots? I asked that question of Mr. Wally Typerd, and there is none. That's a subject to tracking who. It's only for who voted, because that's recorded on the voter list that they check it off.
Well, I've heard about this. And so instead of barcodes and things like that, they're talking about things like watermarks. It's almost like a dollar bill. You don't care who spent the dollar. You just want to make sure that that dollar bill or that ballot is the original legitimate ballot. And someone didn't go and make 5,000 photostatic copies.
And you know what? The ballots are printed by the state.
That's,
And they're delivered to the town hall. Now, as far as I know, they do not have any watermarks or anything on them for tracking, but the ballots should be validated whether they have 10,000 ballots this year, 5,000 people voted, so we have 5,000 ballots that are remaining. And that's the accounting process that should take place, because every ballot, and I've asked for ballots in the past, and what they've done is they've made me a Xerox or photocopy of the ballot so I wouldn't have a actual ballot in my hand, which is the right thing to do.
Yeah, they have sample ballots that they
Right.
print out and everything. But you know, that's an interesting point. I never thought of this. No. So I think
know.
I'm lucid. I just go with it. So now
But-
that you say that, I'm thinking to myself, well, how many ballots? If you've only got 17,000 registered voters in Danvers, so what should we get? We should get like 20,000 ballots that are
Probably.
legitimate.
Yep.
And so then you issue out the ballots per precinct, how many have registered, and then you
Right.
keep those other ones in the safe.
And
if
this-
you get a bad ballot, then you have to take the bad ballot and give them another one, but
Right.
then you have to put the bad, so you can have that
There's an
parity check.
accounting
There's
process.
an accounting process. That
Right.
everything is counted
The
for.
spoiled ballots, that's what they call them.
Okay, spoiled.
And
I
they
don't
do,
know. I don't
as
know.
far as I know, they account for it.
Okay.
That's what I was told. So, now, what do we,
We're down to 8 minutes there,
Vote-
Mark. I just thought I'd let you
yeah,
know. So,
we're,
okay.
we're just going to finish
Okay, we're
this
gonna-
subject.
okay.
That's our main subject for today anyway.
Okay.
Voting machines. Now, as you know, in the last 3 years, I believe, 3 years ago, we acquired new voting machines because the old ones were probably good, but they were replaced. Now, the voting machines, as I have been told, and I have asked that question over and over again, are not connected to the internet. Because what they're there for is only to record the votes that are run through, the ballots that are run through,
Right.
and the actual counts
Right.
for each candidate.
Right.
At the end of the voting period, those vote counts are recorded on a strip of, I don't know, it's like a receipt tape
Yes.
that they provide, and that's how the accounts then are recorded.
Right.
Now, they have regular voting machines. They have the early voting machines that are at Town Hall.
Correct.
And they also have a special machine that is placed close to the clerk's table when you go in to vote for handicapped or on a wheelchair or something like that. And that machine doesn't even, you don't even have to punch in your ballot. You do it on the screen,
Yeah.
and the ballot is printed out for you.
Yeah, see, that's the problem. I mean, how can you have traceability if that soft screen, there's no, and that's the problem with that thing I told you about, is that the people thought that, well, we got the soft copy, we got the printout to tell you what it is so we can throw out the ballots. No, that's the fail-safe, that's the
Right,
check.
right.
And so to add insult to injury, I mean, again, because it's not reported, then it didn't happen. If a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, doesn't make a sound, even though the lawsuits failed because of a technicality, oh, you don't have standing. It's like, yeah, we know you killed him with that gun, but we got the gun illegally, so we can't use that as evidence, right? Okay, so,
All right.
but no, I want to just say this
Go for
because
it.
it's very clear that when they were auditing, it happened up in Hooksett, New Hampshire. It happened, and then in the battleground states. No, not Hooksett. One of them's, I forget the town, but in the battlegrounds in Pennsylvania, Virginia, and in Arizona, they ran audits, and even in Georgia, they ran audits, and they took 100 ballots. They wrote them out. 100 for Trump, 100 for Biden. They ran them through the machine, and when they counted it out, Biden got 113 votes and Trump got 87 votes. And it's, what? Because it doesn't matter what the ballot says, the machine was programmed to do that.
Well, this is the reason I asked the
just trickle
question
down.
in regards to the voting machines,
Exactly.
because our voting machines are very similar to what has been going
That's
on in
right.
the rest of the country.
But as long as it's not reported, it really didn't happen. And if you talk about it on Facebook or any of the high-tech, social platforms, Twitter, they will block you, ban you, cut you out. They're going to cut the show out. They'll
Well,
cut me out. I'm
they're
gone.
not going to cut the show out. David, I think what we need is the final clip by Albert Einstein, and this is one of the things that we're fearful of. I fear the day that technology will surpass our human interaction. The world will have a generation of idiots. And Albert, in his wisdom, was so right, but he was about 50 years or 60 years too early. But the thing is, it's happening. What we are relying on is on the internet. We're relying on Facebook and TikTok and whatever else there is out there, and I stay away from that. But the thing is that Albert has very good wisdom, and I appreciate that. That's why I've been posting him up every show, because it is so important. The one question I have on here is voting machines. Do the machines produce Splunk logs for post-election forensic analysis if needed? I don't know what a Splunk log is, but we'll investigate that further, and we'll ask that question of our registrars. And I really appreciate the time that Wally and Catherine have spent with me and with you guys, I think. She has been very receptive in answering questions. So, the one thing that I want to do is to go to the next show will be next Thursday.
Okay.
And I will have Mark Smith and possibly another person as guests speaking about what's going on with our school system, with the masks, with COVID, Board of Health, and all of this baloney that's happening.
Trickle-down mandates?
Trickle-down mandates, and the mandates, as I've been saying for months, for years, are through a bunch of dictators.
Is it me? Or,
Yes.
Is it me, or is it the fact that most of these mandates are coming from the blue states, and the blue leaders in the red states have got away from all the
All
mandates?
right, you got an opportunity
and
for closing comments. Here we go, Jim.
Okay.
Now, we'll also show the last clip, and Thursday, January 20th, 2022, we'll have the next show, and I hope you can maybe join us. But we'll have more of a general discussion in regard to what's going on in the town of Danvers, because people are very upset of what's going on with the dictates that are coming down from the Board of Health. And they're not really coming from the Board of Health. They're coming from the town manager, from the political side. Your turn.
Yeah, and it's coming from the Board of Education. Again, it's trickle-down mandates, right? I mean, the feds to the states to the town halls. That's how it's working. And that's all I wanted to say is that when you look at the statistics of the red states and the blue states, mandates, no mandates, and if you looked at the raw statistical numbers, it would be a match. But I mean, there's no.
David, can we have the door? This is my infamous town hall door, and what they're doing with these mask mandates and these vaccine mandates and all of this relief that we're not getting is they close the door again because the public does not have access to the town hall, who are being paid by us residents. So thank you, Jim, and thank you, Joe, for attending us. And thank you, Danvers.
Good night, Danvers.
Thank you.